Undertow is the new Jamie Bell movie.
So you had Jamie Bell on the programme.
Yes, we did.
And he was a very nice chap.
He was very nice.
And this is the latest movie by David Gordon Green, who had a couple of hits, well, independent hits with George Washington and All the Real Girls. It's a story set in the Deep South. Of course, if you know anything about Jamie Bell, you'll know that he's not from the American Deep South. He's, of course,
the Deep Northeast.
The Deep Northeast. And he does a very good job with the accent. Apparently, at the beginning of the film, it says this was made with the help of law enforcement officers from Georgia and also of the family. And so it implies that it's a true story, but in fact it's much closer to a parable. The inspiration for the story was apparently told, there's a runaway hotline, and somebody rang up and told one of the runaway hotline, call monitorers this story, which then turned out to be sort of fictional. But what happened was David Gordon Green thought it was an interesting story and made it into a movie that looks like it ought to be real, but in fact is much more based on mythology and a parable. The story is that there is a father and his brood, one of whom is played by Jamie Bell with a lovely accent. The father's brother returns from out of prison. It's very Cain and Abel, and there is some Mexican gold coins, which one of the brothers has, which the other brother wants, which then get into the hands of the offspring, and then it becomes a chase movie. So it's very much, there's conversations about trips across the river Styx, there's stuff about eternal damnation, souls. I mean, I love all this. Very, very early on, somebody gets their foot nailed to a piece of wood.
Yeah,
so
well, we mentioned that when yes. Jamie was on, because obviously he's not going to do any more dancing at all.
It's wince-tastic, that moment, isn't it?
But he actually did it.
Yes.
Apparently there is a scene earlier on in the movie, which didn't actually make it, but he actually does put a nail through his foot in the course of filming this whole project.
Well, I did go generally the sort of the lilting tone of the piece. You've seen it, right?
Yep.
It's visually very beautiful. I could have done without the jump cuts. I could have done without the freeze frames. That I don't find entirely necessary. But David Gordon Green has got a very good eye for this particular location. Interestingly enough, one of the executive producers on it is Terrence Malick. Now, of course, Terrence Malick is best known for Badlands and for having capturing a certain kind of Southern Gothic. And I think that there is the flavour of Terrence Malick's work in this, if not entirely the quality. Very few things are comparable with Badlands. I mean, I think Terrence Malick is, for me, he's everything that Stanley Kubrick wasn't. He's a great visionary, but he also had some kind of substance. But I think there are interesting things in Undertow. It plays like a lazy, hot summer afternoon. Occasionally you feel yourself nodding slightly, and it's slightly dreamlike. But I don't say that as a bad thing. I mean, it has, as I said, a dreamlike, fairy tale, parable-like quality. It has a very interesting score by Philip Glass, which is that kind of, spiraling, circling kind of thing, a very interesting soundscape. It's definitely it's a movie of moments rather than of linear narrative, but there's a lot to recommend. And Jamie Bell is really good because it's very hard to do that Georgia accent. I mean,
he said he just hung out at Walmart a lot, and just listened to people.
That's right. He said that was how he researched it, and obviously that's the way to do it. He just went and talked to them. And obviously I'm not American. The question would be whether or not an American audience could hear it, but apparently Americans who have seen it have thought that he's doing absolutely fine. Because we had both.
It took out for months, that film.
I know. So directed by Saul Metzstein, and it's not MASH, and it's not Catch-22, and it's based on a novel called No One Thinks of Greenland, although I think it's shot in Iceland, and the action seems to be moved to Iceland, and it stars Jason Biggs as a soldier who is dropped in a remote army outpost. He's the wrong soldier, but the people in charge refuse to accept that he's the wrong soldier, and he is then caught up in this asylum-like army base in which he cannot escape because he's in the middle of nowhere. No one will accept that he actually is who he is, and it's a kind of prolonged metaphor about the madness of war. Now, as I said, it's not Catch-22 and it's not MASH, both of which it sort of nods towards, and both of which it doesn't manage to achieve. On the other hand, it is quite charming. I think Natasha McElhone gets dealt a slightly poor hand as the love interest, which is a sort of rather underwritten role. Jason Biggs is very, very good. Jeremy Nordman is very good. Michael Ironside, of course, is terrific. And I do think that Saul Metzstein has got a nice directorial eye. There is a good sort of sense of the absurd about it, particularly in the use of the location, the way in which you do get that sense of real madness. And it is very much separated from world events. It is, like I said, I think the closest comparison is something like The Ninth Configuration, although I understand that that's a film for which I have a great affection, but an awful lot of people don't get a handle on. So it's a confusing mix of things. The World's Fastest Indian, the latest movie by Sir Anthony Hopkins. I am now going to give every film star with a title their correct title. So, Sir Anthony Hopkins.
Do I have to call you Dr. Kermode?
Yes, you do. Well, you always have done anyway. I know you've done it in an ironic way, but it is Dr. Kermode.
The irony will continue.
Thank you very much. There's a thing on that Mark Kermode website which has said, of course, that me insisting that I be called Dr. Kermode is no better than Sir Ben Kingsley. So who on earth do I think I am? So even the Mark Kermode Appreciation website is turning on me. That's it.
I have no friends left.
I didn't even know there was one.
No, well, there we go. There we go. You see how things are going. Anyway, World's Fastest Indian, apparently based on a true story. I have never heard of this guy, but you might have done. Burt Munro, in the 1960s, set land speed records on this. The World's Fastest Indian, being the Indian motorcycle, when he went out to the Bonneville Flats, it's an Australian film made by Roger Donaldson. What he does is he raises money from the locals, he gets the money to go to America, and then he treks across America to get to the Bonneville Flats in order to compete in this competition. Which
in the wacky races.
It is basically the wacky races. It's all apparently true. I say apparently because I haven't, attempted to verify any of this. Strange thing is, it's a bit like the Straight Story, the David Lynch movie, in which an out-of-towner travels through America and meets a whole bunch of people who are wild and wacky and a bit weird, but all rather nice. And the encounters are all very human and very personal and very nice, and everyone's kind of nice to him. And in the end, nice things happen, and it's kind of moving. And you think, despite thinking, I'm not entirely sure about a movie in which Sir Anthony Hopkins does that accent for the entire film, about 5 minutes in, you start forgetting about it. And then there are just some lovely, tender moments in it. It's not a
particularly
masterpiece.
Between his the guy who lives next door's son.
Yes, exactly. Oh, you've seen
and
this
Sir
film?
Anthony. Well, Mr. Donaldson came on the programme.
Well, Roger Donaldson is a very good director, and what he manages to do is to inject.
He did Bounty, didn't he?
Yes. To inject a real sense of, again, human dignity into the story. I mean, it's very surprising that there are moments in it in which, you feel genuinely touched and genuinely moved. And he meets up with this whole string of strange people who help him on his way with all his problems, including his prostate problems at one point. And it's all rather lovely. And you come out of it thinking the world's a good place and people are basically decent, and it's marvellous that all these different people live together in the same world. And incidentally, isn't it incredible that an old codger went that fast on a motorbike which looked like it was going to fall apart the minute he got it on the boat? I mean, had you heard of this story before you saw the film?
No, I hadn't heard of him.
I mean, it was
or the story, but maybe it's famous down under. But it's a nice little tale.
But it is an extraordinary little tale, isn't it? So It's not a masterpiece. It's a small little movie, but it's worth seeing. Now,
Perfume, then, starring Anthony Hopkins and Doris Day.
Well, Perfume, which, as you explained, it stars Anthony Hopkins and Doris Day, and is based on a book that was released earlier this year.
That's right. Well, it came out in paperback earlier this year, and we reviewed it recently. But actually, it was originally written in about 1985.
It has been around for quite a long time and has been slated for adaptation for quite a long time. Directors who were apparently attached to it at various times include Tim Burton and Ridley Scott, with Milos Forman, Stanley Kubrick, and even Martin Scorsese interested, despite the fact that it is theoretically an unfilmable novel. The story is, it's an olfactory serial killer story set in 18th century France. The main character played by Ben Whishaw. Do you have your stuff ready? Okay, in order to set the scene.
Right. What do I need for this?
Well, as you already
all
said,
of them.
All of them. So
okay.
Here we go. So the scene is being set that Ben Whishaw.
Which do I need first?
Wait. Ben Whishaw is born amidst a stinky fish market that smells of fish.
You didn't mention fish.
I did say fish.
Oh, you did. Sorry, I didn't write that one down.
Fine.
Okay, fish
Stinky
first.
fish
right.
market,
yeah.
right? And a fairly extraordinary birth sequence. And the omnipresent smell of the latrine, which instantly leaves the door open because that smell sort of affects the whole of the beginning of the story. He realises that the thing that he can do is smell everything. His only relationship with women is based on smell, and of course very quickly therefore turns to unpleasantness because he can't do anything to capture the smell of the women. And he then ends up trying to get a job with Dustin Hoffman as a perfumier. And he does Dustin Hoffman in that kind of Dustin Hoffman way, that there's a little bit of a hint of something going on in there, and yet it is in the end basically Dustin Hoffman. Now, because we have a brief period of time, because James will review this when it comes out, for next week's show, because he's here next week, because I'm not, after having spent Christmas with you, I'm going to go off into a sulk.
Why? It's because you won't be feeling well, because you'll have a
terrible cold at that point, yeah. On the upside, it is a very difficult text to do. It is probably an unfilmable text, and if you look at the olfactory movies we have, they range from Rika, which is a horror movie, Polyester, which is a kind of comedy movie, Scent of a Woman, which is Al Pacino overacting and doing his whole stuff, and it is very hard to get that stuff right if you're not doing comedy or horror. And to some extent, I suppose this is sort of doing horror, but the cheap trick, we'd say they should have given it out with scratch and sniff cards, and we have already done the scratch and sniff joke. And the main problem, the reason that wouldn't work, is that what he creates through his horrible endeavours is the smell of the most heavenly innocence. cue the thing that you're meant to be breathing in for.
What?
And that's cue the point of everyone breathing in the smell of the heavenly innocence you told them to do.
If they had it ready, if they had the baby's head or
and
whatever.
it's only partly successful. You end up with an awful lot of shots of noses breathing in. You end up with an awful lot of very decorative corpses, which I have to say I felt very queasy and uncomfortable about. And you also end up with a rather ponderous sense that the movie is a bit too full of itself. I don't think it's a great work. I think it's apparently the most expensive German movie ever made, but I think it's trying to do something that would have maybe been interesting several years ago, but now just looks a bit dated and a bit pompous, and I'm a bit sniffy about it. Boom, and if you will, boom.
But